So we're a couple minutes late, but we are going to call the June 27th regular meeting of the Calaveras County Planning Commission to order and get started with the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All of the planning commissioners are here today. We do not have any consent agenda items, and probably no agenda changes, right?
Well, the only thing that we probably want to add to the agenda is public comment. This was originally thought of as a special meeting since it was a continuation, but because it's being held on the date of a regular meeting, call it a regular meeting, in which case we should probably allow for the standard public comment for non-agenda items.
So next up, is anybody here to comment on any item not on the agenda today? Would you like to comment on something not on the agenda today?
I certainly would like to.
Just come on up. Tell us who you are.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. My name is Chris Niebuhr. I'm a District 2 property taxpayer, businessman, and family man for decades. I'm forced here today by systemic failure in the planning department of Calaveras County. I believe this group to be the next step in my seeking redress for unlawful restrictions on my property rights. I bear copies of use parameters for a business and property I own. It's a use preview and upcoming agenda item that I would like to keep everyone informed on. Do we have a clerk that could distribute these?
And I
May I
can take
hand you
care of
these
that.
these
Yes.
to you? I now relinquish my remaining time to District 2 Commissioner Mr. Timothy Lattis, sir, and ask you for an explanation of the processes involved in seeking redress through the Calaveras County Planning Commission body.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, you can't ask for a response from a commissioner on any item discussed during public comment like this. So
Well,
what you
I
can
can
do
ask-
is describe to us your situations and just inform us.
It's, I believe, outlined generally in the use parameter document you're all looking at, a document that has been submitted to the planning department. Gina Caffin, Planner 3, refused to read it, refused to schedule an appointment, and made it very clear that the next thing she planned to do was actually retire.
So would you like to spend your time telling us what the issue is? Oh, is it a particular project that is going to be coming to the commission, or is this a general planning issue? I just kind of skimmed the first page here. So,
This is a property I own. This is a business I own. These are solicited use parameters that have dropped into a department that is currently not active in responding to the citizens of this county.
Do you have a project? Is there a project that you're trying to implement on your property?
I'm a winemaker.
Okay, there you go.
Yes, there you go.
So are you trying to create a tasting room or a winery or?
I have been for years an active winemaker. I am affiliated with the Knights of the Vine, among other groups. I was restricted by federal restrictions to levels below that which the community requires, and am attempting to move my winemaking operation into the bonded winery realm.
Okay,
Quite possibly the best chance this county has, if we look at figures. Wineries and associated industries are the big winner. In San Joaquin County, right next door, where many of my operations are, there is a $5 billion a year wine industry. This county is capable of actually making better wine. The nature of wine is that it's not made best in a swamp. It's made best. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
does anybody else have a public comment on any item not on the agenda today? Then let's go ahead and reopen our public hearing on the general plan update. And I think, Peter, you have some items to lead us through.
Yes, so at the last hearing, I think we sort of concluded the discussion, concluded all of the edits and corrections we wanted to make. I then took that, compiled all those changes, and provided a clean copy, or an almost clean copy. There were a few underlined and strikeouts that we missed, in going through it. And what I'd like to do is just sort of walk through those changes. Let me step back. The changes that were made at the last meeting are articulated in the memo that was sent out last week, I think. Since then, I've heard from two commissioners that I missed a few things. And then going through those corrections, I noticed we missed a few other things. So what I'd like to do, unless you have any questions on the memo and where I've articulated where the changes were made, I'd just sort of like to walk through about 15 pages or so where there were subsequent edits that were made or need to be made in order to clearly reflect what we have. So I pass out a packet. It starts off with page 1 of the land use element. And these are the changes that have been pointed out to me, or ones that I've recognized since I sent out that final clean version of the plan. So if you would turn, and then you all should have a copy of that clean version of the general plan in front of you. So if we could turn to page LU1, which is where the first correction is. And some of these are just very simple. We had a discussion of, several meetings back about the word coordination and how the courts have attributed special meaning to that word. That was probably after we had reviewed the land use and circulation element. So I did a search of coordination, coordinating through both of those elements, and came up with additional changes that needed to be made along those lines. So on page LU1, first there was an underlined space in the second paragraph that's been deleted. or it shouldn't be deleted. It's still there. But on the bottom of the page, under goals and policies, I've changed the word regional planning and coordination to regional planning and cooperation. So where there were just simply, corrections that needed to be made, something that I missed, those are just reflected in the pages that I provide to you. Where it's something that wasn't pointed out to me, that's something that hasn't been discussed with the commission, it's shown in underline and strikeout. When we're all done here, I hope that we'll have one final clean version that will go to the Board of Supervisors that will be the Planning Commission recommended draft general plan. Two changes on page LU1, changing coordination to cooperation, and for the 18th time trying to get rid of that little underlined space. The next page that had edits was on page LU9. On the table there under Other, in the Parks and Recreation section. For some reason, the spacing of that, not a column, but the row, cut off the last two lines. So I just increased the spacing there so we can read the last two lines. It read, per environmental health with the footnote G on that. And that just was something that, some weird thing that Word does to me all the time. It tries to throw things in there or do things I don't want. So that change has been made. And then because of that additional space, it carried over onto page LU10, and so the numbering was different there. And then on footnote H, corrected the reference to the implementation measure. It's supposed to be PF2D, not PF4D. So that
Footnote G.
Yeah.
Footnote G.
Yeah.
Don't read sideways very well. So that change has been made. The next correction is on LU13. This is just very minor, but plans, under specific plans, it was supposed to be singular, not plural. It actually was struck out, and we just sort of missed that correction, so that's been caught. If I miss something or there's something else here, wait a second, interrupt me. And I'll just keep going through this unless there's a question about it. On page LU15, there was a sentence that was just duplicated, probably cut and pasted, and we just pasted it twice accidentally. So that's been struck from the bottom of goal or policy LU 1.6 on page 15. On page LU 18, this is where there are a number of coordination to cooperation changes. And those are shown in underlined and strikeout because of because it's new, it's something that the Commission hasn't discussed. So in the header, we changed it to cooperation. Goal LU6 went from coordinate to cooperative planning efforts. And policy LU 6.3 has been revised. The middle line there where it said, the sentence read previously, provide coordinated planning with the City of Angels Camp and within the City of Angels Camp sphere of influence and area of interest to coordinate the effective provision of infrastructure. That was just a lot of unnecessary words.
Yes.
So I just changed it to effectively provide infrastructure. And hopefully that is clear, means what we want it to mean. Any questions on that at all? Is that acceptable?
Great. That's fine.
Good, thank you. Then we move to LU 20, and I'm not sure what happened there, but I did not have the right policy in there, so the correct policy has been replaced for LU2G. And that's with the 6 bullet points, and that I think accurately reflects what the Commission did on that one. And then Originally it was on the bottom of page LU20, it's now LU21. We have another change coordination to cooperation on LU3C. Similarly, on page LU20, wait a second. Page LU22 in here, but I don't see what the change was.
I think it might have just gotten pushed when the pages got
Oh,
renumbered.
yeah, that's probably what happened. On LU23, both in measure LU5E as well as LU6A, again, the change from coordination to cooperation. And that was all of the edits that I had for land use. Was there anything else that I missed in there?
An additional designation for the parcels that are currently designated future specific plan or specific plan or
land use
noted
map.
that way, and they
Yes.
needed a different designation
So,
or explanation.
The land use,
Sorry.
the GIS
Feedback
team
from the
is
universe.
still working on the final edits to the land use map. All of the ones that we discussed, and I've articulated what those changes were in my memo to you. The one thing that probably the biggest question was the Tuscany Hills project. There's two components to that. One is the off-site area where density was transferred from to enable development to be concentrated on the bulk of the property. The map is being changed for that remote area to resource production. The overall density of the project is 1 unit per 5 acre, or 1 unit per 5 acre. So we're recommending that the land use designation be rural transition B, which is it basically reflects the development that was been approved for that project. And that will show up on the final map. I hope that.
So with that, why there doesn't need to be another entry on
Right.
on table LU1?
So you're using our
We're-
current
yeah, we are
designations.
using the current land use designation.
And the project itself will have its own conditions for the density transfer
Right,
and all
right.
of that. Okay, great.
Okay, moving on to the circulation element. Again, we had a coordination and cooperation issue on page C1, the first paragraph. On page 3, the third paragraph down, there was reference policy C 2.3, it should have been C 2.2, if that correction's been made. I can't figure out why the shading is there. I've done everything I can to get rid of it. I need someone who's better versed to figure that out for me at this point, but we will get there. So that was circulation. Were there any other questions or concerns about circulation?
Yeah, on page C11, where we say the county manages the transit district,
Yep.
You're right.
the first sentence can be, the Calaveras Council of Governments, Barron CCOG, close Barron, operates Calaveras Transit, which,
I've got it in mind too. Well, it's just was a statement.
Michelle, did you have something else?
I just had a question on page C15. And it's about exceptions to the road policies. And two of them address historical significance. One says areas of historical significance. We're looking at the bullet points in C 2.2. And one is impacts to a unique historical resource. It seems like those should be combined into one bullet point that addresses historic issues, because it's kind of an awkward fit with bicycle and pedestrian facilities. But I wondered if we should also have a bullet point that addresses rural character. I know that's something that's in the current community plan for Murphy's, and I think it might be in some of the other community plans, that there are occasions when the required road improvements might change the character of a space enough that we don't want to do them. So that's a philosophical thing for that. But in any case, I think the historical things need to go together.
So you're talking about the last three bullet points in C 2.2?
Yes. So I'm just saying the third one mentions historical significance, but we already have a bullet point for it.
So you're suggesting moving that phrase, the last phrase of that, up to the first bullet?
Yes.
That makes sense.
Right. But then I'm also suggesting that we might want to consider a fourth bullet point. I just would hate to lose that from the Murphy's community plan. I know that that is something that we have used in the past. And since we're losing our community plan.
Do you have some suggested language? Do you have some suggested language?
Just improvements necessary to achieve the LOS standard would prohibit or would negatively impact the rural character of the adjacent properties, or I don't know what the exact wording is. So I'd like to see how the commissioners feel about that, and maybe even give the public one more opportunity to comment. So do we want to hear from the public first? I promise I have very few comments like this. Very, very, very few.
How about would negatively impact the rural character of the region or community?
I like it.
I don't know about this. I mean, any time you have a wider road, you're going to have some impact on rural character. By definition, you're taking up some ground.
But this is a specific exception. They'd have to come and ask to do this. So you would have the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission or the planning staff would have or Public Works, the opportunity to say, no, that's not an appropriate exception in this case. I'm not saying we should just blanket, because I agree.
Yeah, well, the lead into the bullet points are exceptions to the LOS standards may include, but are not limited to, the following circumstances. So, I don't think there's any harm in stating another one, because you can come up with another one on your own if you want to.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't object to what's suggested.
So
I guess the concern I think that Commissioner Booster has expressed is that going to be sort of a carte blanche opportunity for people. Well, this is we don't want to build a new road because it's going to destroy the rural character.
Right.
When maybe it would significantly impact or something like that, so that there's a tie to, there's something special about this area or this community that a narrower road or not meeting the LOS standard, rather than just simply, it's an impact. That we have to tie it back to the significance of either the historic character or the visual character or something. It's on a, state federally designated scenic area or something like that.
So I see two places where this could come up in the, inside a community plan area or a community area. We're not calling them community plan areas right now. Just where those narrow roads are part of that historic community. If you look at Moke Hill, we wouldn't want to have somebody widen the roads. A bunch of these things might apply in that case. It could be historic resources, but it could also just be the rural character. And in Murphy's, this has come up multiple times, like why we don't want to widen just one little section of road here in front of one little project. And it kind of destroys the sense that you're driving through where it's still, horses on one side and houses on the other. But the other place is the scenic byway. The corridor plan for it says that the community has made the decision they don't want improvements to make it meet regular highway standards. I also came up when I was on the COG with the Wagon Trail project, and we were trying to argue to Caltrans that it wasn't necessary to make it perfectly straight. I mean, yeah, that's great. We're not looking for the speedway through here. We were looking to maintain, but make much more safe and have less impediments to travel, but to maintain some of that winding rural character of the foothills. So it's something that I've just seen come up before. I'd like to see it acknowledged.
Well, it seems to me these bullet points are just matters for consideration. And it doesn't say required exceptions. LLS standards are the following. And so I really, especially speaking from a community, Sheep Ranch is in its community plan says, please don't do anything to the roads other than maintain them for basic safety reasons. I'm sure the Sheep Ranch community would join in with you on this.
Does any member of the public want to weigh in on this one item that we're discussing right now?
Vicki Reinke, Calaveras County. I guess I just have a question. You're talking about not widening the roads, and yet in all this stuff it talks about how we have to have ways for bicycles to go on our roads now and all of that. So I just wanted to bring that into it because it makes no sense. So
Chris Niebuhr, longtime Moke Hill resident, property taxpayer, businessman. If the roads are brought up to current standards in McCallamy Hill, the community will cease to exist as it does. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Tom Infacino, Calaveras Planning Coalition. A couple points I want to mention here. I appreciate your concern about the community areas. The current standard allows it to go to level of service D. And I just want everybody to realize that level of service D goes all the way up to the very bottom of level of service E. So that's a lot of traffic congestion currently allowed by the standard. If you allow the standard to be waived to the entire next level, which would be E, that means you're going all the way to the bottom of F, which is gridlock. So one of the things we had suggested with regard to the circulation element is consider when you're allowing these things to be waived on a project-by-project basis, put some intermediate barrier so we don't end up with level of service F in Murphy's or McCallamy Hill or other places. So there's a process. There's a measure called volume to capacity ratio that can slice that level of service into smaller pieces. So if there was a way to acknowledge that, yes, the board can recognize community character and say, yeah, we're not going to widen the road here, but only to a certain extent so that we're not getting the gridlock at the other end of the process, I think that would we'd find a happy medium. Thank you. Oh, did you have a question?
Actually, I was looking for, how do we word it? Because we're not really, my intention was on any of these items is not, oh, well, we'll go to the next LOS. It's more to provide very specific flexibility in the specific requirements of the road
Well, that would be
improvements.
looked at with the specific project,
Yeah.
And the VC ratio, analysis would be done at that point in time, and that's when the judgment call by the commission of the board would say, we're willing to go this much further down. It would be, it could be done, but it would be a much more complex analysis at this level, at a general plan level, to try
Right.
to determine what's the acceptable intermediary step.
And it could be something as small as just allowing a small section of the road to be narrower or to maintain a grove of trees or some reasonable item. I don't think the intention is like, yeah, let's just go on down to that next level. It's a much finer, subtle
Right.
modification to the requirements.
I think the word exceptions doesn't mean full exceptions of categories. I
Right.
think it's clear enough that you could slice and dice.
Yeah, while trying to maintain the best traffic flow.
Well, I'm still troubled by this for the reasons that the planning director has pointed out. I mean, what this requires is LOSC on county maintained roads, except in community areas where it can be D, and so the drop down would probably be from C to D. But the rural character is so open-ended, and it's quite unlike the others that are here, which are significant impacts to a unique historical resource or historic significance or a sensitive environmental area. Now, in a particular case, if there was somebody wanted an exception that doesn't fall within those bullet points, you could still ask for it. Whatever it might be, because it says the exceptions may include but are not limited to. But when you put in something as broad as rural character, it sort of signals the idea that, this shouldn't be that hard to get, the exception. And that's my concern.
I understand your point of what you're trying to prove, but I totally agree with Commissioner Wooster on this one, because it does say may include but not limited to. So, I mean, that's kind of, you can ask for it on a case-by-case basis.
I guess I want to recognize something that we say is important to us in this county and that our tourism industry is based on. So that's all. I think we should move on. If there's not enough support for it, we need to just move along.
Well, I've heard one say yes and two say no. I'd like to hear, before I say that's not included or it is included.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Let's hear from,
I would say no as well, leave it the way it is.
Pardon me?
No.
so, yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I need to get on those community plans.
Page C15. Anything else in circulation? Let's move to resource production. And the first page I have is on page 2. And this had to do with a conversation I had, I think just the other day, regarding the farmland mapping program, the fact that when the plan was prepared, we didn't have the soils information. We do have the soils information, and the Department of Conservation is now working on developing those maps. There's also some work that the county would need to do if we want to add farmland of local importance, which won't be included in the state mapping unless we ask them to include it. And it has to be something that the board acts on. So I have some revised language that sort of just talks about more of the timing of that, sort of a correction of that. So instead of saying they are not included, they were not included at the time of preparation of the general plan, which would indicate that it's going to be available in the future.
And it's clear that prime farmland identified under the Williamson Act will not necessarily be identified by the state as prime or unique.
The farmland mapping and monitoring program has its own unique definitions of what constitutes prime land. It has to do with soil type and water availability and actually whether or not it's being used for agriculture. And the Williamson Act has a different definition of prime farmland. It has to do with the intensity of use. So they may end up correlating, they may not. So the fact that we do have some in the technical background report that showed prime land under Williamson Act doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the same thing.
Thank you.
Next correction was on page 7, and this was just a numbering change. It went from RP 5.2 to RP 5.4, so that's just been corrected to RP 5.3. On page 9, there was a phrase in parentheses that was in the wrong location in that sentence. It needed to be moved up to after tree plantings along the boundary. And so that just had moved that phrase from one location to the other. On page 13, measure RP4A, the third bullet was suggested that phrase really doesn't apply. This is not something that the commission discussed previously, so it's something we should probably discuss here now, whether or not that phrase actually makes sense in this policy. So I suggested that it be just deleted. But that's up to the commission.
Well, on this particular one, a variation of that phrase was added by the EIR. And it originally read as added by the EIR, and that conditions will be imposed as necessary to protect the mineral resources, which didn't make any sense because you were mining them, not protecting them. So then the thought was, well, we should have something here to protect the production of the mineral resources. The idea being that maybe the neighbors would do things that would hinder the activity and so forth. And so the words to protect the production of were added, but that doesn't really work in either because this is all in the conditional use permit for the mining activity, which doesn't affect the neighbors at all. You can't control what they do by a CUP on the mining site. And so my thought, let's just take it out because I couldn't see any way to do this, and you certainly couldn't do it in the CUP. That's what's the thinking.
Your take makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Makes sense.
Okay. So that will be deleted. And that ends all the edits in the resource production element, unless there are any other things that you caught that I missed. So then we'll move to conservation and open space. And the first edit that I have is on page 12. Somehow we duplicated the same policy under COS 3.8 and 3.9. It should have been the second one with the reference to implementation measure COS-4040. So just corrected that. On page 19, there's a minor typo. We had at the very top of the page, second line, it should be ratio, not ration. On page 23, COS 5C, we referenced, or we added that we wanted to have the reduction plan prepared by 2021, but let's point out it didn't say when in 2021.
Yeah.
So we could either say by the end of or by December 31st, whatever seems to fit.
The end of is fine with me.
Okay.
It's fine, yeah.
End of's fine.
And that was all, let's see, what's this? Yeah, that was all that I had in conservation open space.
There's one underline that needs to be taken out on COS 6. Under associated plans and documents, the word technical is underlined.
Oh, yes, yes. In noise, on page 4, first paragraph, that was changed about 2/3 of the way down. A noise contour map identifying the noise level at the center line of the road is shown on the following page. Change that to figure N1. And then on the next page, N5, there are also a number of underlying technical edits that we missed. We'll catch that as well. That was the only edit that I had in the noise element. So then we turn to the safety element. On page 17, we had changed the language in S3G to clarify that there's the Office of Emergency Services is no longer in the Sheriff's Office. So it would be Sheriff's Office, comma, Office of Emergency Services. The two separate agencies. And that was the only correction in the safety element, unless you had anything else. So moving on to the public facilities and services element. This one, I missed something when we went through the whole review of the element, and that was the insertion of discussion on environmental justice. And so on page 9, there are 3 or 4 paragraphs that talk about that. Fortunately, in this county, we do not have any areas that qualify as, what's the term that's used? A disadvantaged community. And so, under the terms of the law. So we didn't have to do a lot of analysis on how we can fix that. The one thing we did find in that analysis was the lack of healthcare access in a lot of our communities. We talked about that in the terms of new policy and new implementation measure, which was added when we discussed this element, but I forgot to add the text that supported that discussion. And so I've proposed a modification to the organization discussion on the first page. It just will be included that discussion. And then on page 12, there's additional language that supports the requirement.
I wonder if maybe it could get confusing that we say we don't have any disadvantaged communities. Oh, and by the way, here are disadvantaged legacy communities.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we ought to...
Two different laws, two different terms,
I
using
know,
the same words.
I realize.
Thank
I
you,
just wonder
State of California.
When we get to the paragraph talking about the government code and disadvantaged legacy communities, we could put in a parentheses, which is a different category than the disadvantaged communities under CEQA, or whatever it is.
Well, I think it does that. If you go out down to fourth paragraph, the first three deal with Senate Bill 1000. And then the fourth paragraph begins, in addition to the requirements of SB 1000, government code requires an analysis of disadvantaged legacy communities. And then
Yeah,
it goes on and tells you what those are. So I thought it was clear enough.
The way you said it would make it, if we maybe put in an underlined under legacy, it would make clear that we're talking about two different things. I mean, I agree, if you follow the statutory citations, well, it's two different things, but
What if
how
we had,
about just underlining legacy?
What if we had maybe a header at the beginning of this that says, disadvantaged communities? And then before the fourth, we could have disadvantaged legacy communities.
Yes.
And that
That's
way
great.
it makes it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes.
great.
Okay. On page 12, again, we missed one coordinating on PF 1.6. That should be cooperating with special districts. And on page 19, there is edits to PF 2D that I missed, replacing might with may and adding the phrase at the discretion of the approving authority. This was something that you had already discussed, and I just had missed it.
And there was one other word we had, right after approving authority, we had the word and. So it read, allow exceptions to either or both of those requirements for discretionary projects at the discretion of the approving authority and only if all the following circumstances apply. The and is not necessary to the meaning, but I think it's useful
Yes.
to show that there are two different things we're looking at. There's the general discretion, and then there are these list of circumstances.
And that would be fine.
And then on page 23, PF-7A, second line, it should be countywide standards for high-quality internet, not or high-quality internet. I just missed an F. And then the last correction that I had was just to the exhibit for the Arnold White Pines community area, added White Pines to that label. Were there any other edits or corrections to the general plan text that I missed?
I think I got a couple. Yeah, this is major. I mean, we've got one letter underlined that shouldn't be on PF6. minimized. That's an underlining under G. Let's see, I can tell you where it is.
I missed that one.
Somewhere on that page is the word minimized. No, I can't even find it. Anyhow,
I'll look for it.
you'll find it. Are you able on that mapping program to come up with a boundary?
Still working on that.
Okay.
We will, and because there are also edits to the maps that affect those maps, the final version of those maps will, for example, in Copperopolis, with the removal of the Oak Canyon Ranch project, that changes the boundary. So those fixes will be included once I get the final version of the land use map. The public GIS will be updated. We'll post new maps. We'll replace the map in the land use element as well as those highlighted areas for each of the communities. So to update those. And that should be done. My deadline for the GIS was tomorrow on that, so hopefully it'll be done by today or tomorrow. And we'll make sure that I'll let people know that that's available, posted and available. But it will be available before it is sent to the board. The other thing that was included in the packet was the errata sheet. And there was one question that was raised, and this would be attachment 4 to the staff memo that I sent out last week. One more additional edit there. Glencoe was misspelled. I'm trying to think of the words. Was there something else, Kelly, that you
Yes.
brought up?
Yes, there was on page 2 of whatever attachment this is, 4, I think. Yes. Under special status species, it reads, Calaveras County is known to support 24 species of special status plants, table 4.4-2, and 24 special status wildlife species, table 4.4-3, semicolon, such species have the potential to occur as defined above, which is kind of confusing because it starts off with the flat statement that the county is known to support these species, and that's actually not true. It was known to support 18 species of special status plants and 14 special status wildlife species. I would suggest just fixing this so it would say Calaveras County may support, and then go on. So it's not internally inconsistent, put it that way.
Yes.
That
Everybody?
makes sense.
Yes.
Good.
And now then, putting an E on the end of Glencoe was it.
So with all of those last corrections, I think we are prepared to move this on to the Board of Supervisors. And probably the resolution that was attachment 1 in the packet. Unless there's any edits to that, we would recommend that you adopt the resolution and forward this on to the board.
Well, we have received some correspondence about this Copper Valley land use map designation, and I don't know whether the commission wants to take that up or not.
I was going to bring that up also, just that I know that this has been discussed by the Planning Commission previously. I wasn't part of that, so there's so many new planning commissioners. Maybe we should take a quick look at the map and where that is.
No, if you don't say pardon me, nobody knows who did it.
Peter's staring right at me.
Are we able to get the land?
It's coming up.
It's working on it, okay.
The light is there it comes. So this is the southern end of Copperopolis. We have the Saddle Creek project here, Tuscany.
Peter, you got it. You got it.
Screen away, you're blocking.
There we go. Tuscany project here, Saddle Creek. This is the density transfer area to Tuscany, and this was the Oak Canyon Ranch that is now resource production. The Copper Valley Ranch property is this area here. And then there's also a discussion, we had a letter from it was Mr. Nathan that talked about this property down here, that he also was at the hearing, the night meeting we had, that had requested that he retain the future single-family residential designation.
So the previous designation was future single-family?
Under the 96 general plan, both these areas are shown as future single-family residential.
And that's a 1 residence per 5 acres?
Well, it depends on the availability of water, sewer, access.
So there's basically 2 different parcels here, one owned by Brunker and one by Copper Valley Partners.
Yes.
And Brunker's is the one closest to,
Brunker's
Saddle.
one down here in the corner, closest to fronts the Stanislaus County line. The Copper Valley Ranch is this area here.
Well, while I very much sympathize with the individuals involved, I'm not sure how we distinguish their situation from anybody else in the county who has had the designation changed, or is about to have the designation changed to resource production. And my fear is that if we keep the equivalent of their current designation, that we could get spot development of 5-acre estates, which is really what this plan and the general nature of things is trying to avoid. It seems to me that if we keep the resource production designation, or keep, I say, if we when this plan comes into being, if these become resource production, then that gives the chance for the market to develop, to see if it will make sense to develop these areas at that level, or perhaps even to what we've been talking about as far as a specific plan level, where you coordinate the planning. So while I really sympathize with the people involved, I don't see where they're too much different from other people who are under similar circumstances who could come into us and say, well, you've given special treatment to these individuals, now change my property away from the resource production. So I'm rather reluctantly concluding that we should keep the resource production designation on these lands, let the market develop, and then have the county can consider it an amendment to the general plan down the line if it looks as if we should be developing those. And at that point, the county could actually do more planning, because they would know exactly what the situation is and redesignate those properties in a proper manner. So I'm for keeping the land use map the way it is as to those properties.
So those parcels are outside the boundary of the community area right now. I wondered, this boundary that we have for Copperopolis, was that based on the Copperopolis community plan that was in the works?
No,
Or
it was based
it-
on the land use designations and the growth projections that we had and the existing approved projects.
So did the community draft community plan, Kelly probably knows about this, what did they say about those parcels? Or does anybody know?
I think Copper Valley was to be designated rural residential. I don't remember about the Brucker property, which is further out.
Yeah, I think you're right. My recollection is that because, Copper community plan process has been going on for a long time. We had a proposed project. The old boundaries of the general plan didn't really necessarily follow property lines. It was sort of a big square, as all of this area was sort of within potential for future development. This was outside of the community area of the Copperopolis in the 96 plan, because it was shown as future single-family residential rather than community center or community region. I think that, Commissioner Laddish sort of hit on the reason why the planning department and the former planning commission, identified it as resource production today. We have more than enough land for development. We're trying to focus the development, infill and, surrounding the existing, population centers. These have even less demand for development now under the more recent projections. I understand the landowner makes, invest for property, thinking that they're, be able to develop it. I'm not sure that it's the county's responsibility to ensure that, someone makes a return on their investment.
What was it designated when they purchased it?
Well, it's zoned, I believe it's zoned A1. The land use designation for that property and for both of these large properties are future single-family residential.
Because if they purchased it as future single-family residence, it was valued at that. That's how the land was valued. That's the value that was put on it. That's what they paid for it. And now we're saying, well, we're sorry, but now we're going to change it. I mean, if it was resource development and they bought it, speculating that it was going to be rural residential, I can understand saying, yeah, you just take a loss. But it just, it's hard for me saying, hey, you're going to take this huge loss because we decided we want to change it after you purchased it. I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
Would you repeat what the zoning is currently for that parcel?
Let me see if I can find that.
I mean, how do we know we're not going to all of a sudden do this to other
Well, that
developers
is,
that bought property, and we say, oh, yeah, you bought it, we zoned it at this future specific development, but we changed our mind. So now we're going to put it back, just take a loss.
well, this is a legitimate exercise in the police powers of a county to designate general plan designation. And if we were to say, well, because it previously was designated for, that we can't change it, there's thousands of acres out there that we're saying this is an inappropriate area for single-family residential development. We're putting it into working lands or resource production because we can't afford the cost of providing the infrastructure, the services to the dispersed community that we have. We don't want more of that. We want to direct development towards existing communities. That's the focus of this plan. There's environmental constraints, there's state requirements that have us reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas issues, and just simply the cost of providing services to a dispersed community is very expensive. And so the focus, the direction of this plan has been to look at the existing land use patterns, existing development constraints, and say, okay, where is it appropriate to put the next 3,000 to 10,000 people that may be coming to the county over the next 20 years, where should they go? And given the fact that we have lots of areas already identified for future development, and we've also identified other areas. You see the Sanguinetti Ranch there in the orange hash mark area. That's an area the county said that makes sense to develop there. It's on a main road. It has potential for infrastructure. Those are the decisions that the commission made 3 years ago when we looked at these maps. I mean, it's certainly within your purview to change the map.
So I'm curious still what the zoning is on that parcel.
And also, Peter, when was the map placed out, the current map, or what we're trying to put in the general plan? When was that provided to the community?
There have been, 4 or 5 different iterations of the map. I think the first map came out in 2011.
Well, the current one that...
And the current one that we have now was 2014.
2014.
There were changes that were made by the Planning Commission in 2015, I believe. Or maybe
So,
it was
I mean,
2016.
with that being said, I agree with Commissioner Laddish on when he says we can't make one, special just because, they made an investment. But reading here, they made an investment in August 2018, so they was well aware of what they was walking into. So we can't
They
make
purchased it in 2006.
special regulations because they put the money out hoping that it wouldn't be changed, but the information was out there. It was they should be well aware that it was going to be made under that designation.
Just doesn't want to highlight that parcel for you, does it?
So it's zone A1.
It's zone,
A1, general
Yeah.
agriculture.
that's what I was
And a part of the bunker property is actually in the Williamson Act zoned AP.
And the property taxes are assessed on that basis, correct?
It's based on the
Current
actual use of the
use.
property. The general plan designation, the zoning doesn't necessarily, isn't reflected in the property tax. It's the actual assessed value of the infrastructure and improvements that are there.
Would we like to hear anything from the public on this quickly?
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay. Would any member of the public like to speak to this?
Vicki Reinke. Yeah, I was curious when I saw this letter, and I know Copperopolis, and they want to be developing there, which is good for our county. I know people that live in Copperopolis. I've never heard anybody object to what was going on with the development there. I think this right here is a perfect example of what's happening to our state and our counties and what government is doing to us, forcing, and this is what you guys are all doing to this person who wants to develop. Private company, they're in there as an investment. They're not coming in here to destroy our county. They want to be able to sell homes and have homes for people to come and live in. It's all market driven. So this whole notion that you guys have such power that you're just going to put that land as, oh, sorry, you can't do anything on that land anymore, is so wrong. I can't even imagine that more people aren't up here screaming about this. This is property rights. It's free market. It's letting people come in and develop if they choose to. I know they've reached out to neighbors. I know Castle and Cook reached out to neighbors. I think they made decisions based on all that. So to take that property off the map as being able to be built on is communism. That is what it is, and I cannot shut my mouth anymore about what's happening to our county and our state with all these regulations. We know that it's just like Peter described, that now we have to do A, B, C, D because the government tells us. And I know if you go in and read Agenda 2030, which is a United Nations plan for the United States and the world, you will see all of this in there. This is a plan, and we don't like it. People that like freedom do not like being told by the government what to do. You all live here. You're supposed to represent the people. You're supposed to be saying, this is nonsense for us here in Calaveras County. We are a rural county. We all like it that way. Nobody wants it to be infill projects, because you know what that means? That in little towns you're going to just build them all up until they're stuffed with people. No, we like it being spread out. We like single-family homes. So anyway, I don't know what else to say about it, but I hope that you do not make that change in that property. I believe right now, any designation for property, if you're buying it right now, it's under the 1996 general plan, because that's the plan that we have approved. I asked that question a couple years ago, and they said, yes, the 1996, whatever is on that, that's how you have to follow today. Now, so the property was zoned in 1996, I believe, which you said it was for family homes in 1996.
Zoned for ag.
Zone for ag.
And
In
had a
1996.
It's zoned for ag. In 1996, the general plan designation identified it as future single-family, so that the
Right.
possibility existed for them to come in
And that's why they purchased the
change
property.
their zoning.
And that's why they started to develop. But I know Castle and Cook left.
They didn't start to develop. There is no development happening on that parcel
I'm
currently,
talking
but they
about
have the
planning
possibility.
for the development.
Yeah.
And we should be welcoming that in Calaveras County. These people come in, they live here or they commute, but they buy things from our local stores. They keep our economy going. They pay property taxes. That in Copperopolis is kind of a nice place to do some of that. So I don't know where you guys are coming from, but I hope that you look at this in a better light. Oh, I didn't bring my paper up, but if you look at your own goals for what the general plan was supposed to do, you are so far off. And I forgot to bring it up here so I could read you some of it, but if you go back to your beginning where you talk about what the philosophies are and what you want to accomplish, you are far from that. Thank you.
Hi, Dina Morris, Copperopolis. Laddish said, my fear, and then he went on and on. That's not our fear in Copperopolis. And you would not be giving special treatment to this developer. How many other developers whose land use designations are about to change have shown up for the general plan meetings and objected to a change to their property? How many of them? As far as I know, just the developers from Copperopolis have been showing up objecting to this change. So to say that other developers are going to come in and want special treatment, I believe that that's just not so. That's not so. They haven't been here before this meeting, and if they show up after it's finalized, that's a different story. Also, I'd like to bring it to your attention, there was a recent Supreme Court case which bolsters the rights for developers and property owners in California and elsewhere. This decision is one of the most important property rights cases in over 30 years. And this came out in the LA Times on June 21st, 2019. And the case is Nick versus Township of Scott, PA. So I urge you to not change this developer's property to resource production. We want to see legitimate businesses come to our community. We want to see this county start bringing in more revenue through this legitimate process. The county's always talking about, well, you know, we need more revenue. Well, this is a great way to bring in more revenue and build up our little downtrodden town. We've got a little ghost town sitting there, a beautiful ghost town in Copperopolis. And I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's been a ghost town ever since I've been coming up here for the last 10 years, and we're tired of it. We want to see those buildings filled with small businesses. Instead, the few that have come there have left. I urge you again to not change it to resource production. You could put our county in jeopardy of some very large lawsuits. This developer has gone through the process and he's tried to change it. He's voiced his opinion time and time again. He's spent many hours at the Planning Commission meetings, and this is ridiculous to even consider changing it to resource production at this point in time. Thank you.
Good morning. Tom Hicks, CB Development Partners. I don't know these two ladies, but I agree with their sentiment. Peter, could you lower the map a little bit there? I think there's a little bit of confusion here. Down a little further, if you would, please.
I think
No,
maybe
no, down,
back
down.
out a little too, so we
Or,
get it
yeah,
some
back it out. That would
context.
be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Tuscany property is shaded. The line just immediately below the Tuscany property is actually the Copper Valley Partners property. Then Brunkers is the one just below that. I think together, Castle and Cooke purchased the Copper Valley property for $16 million in 2006, spent about $3 million doing all their investigation for a very large development. Copper Valley development has no desire to pursue that type of development there. We don't think it's really warranted. However, I think the resource production is very limiting. In this particular parcel, and Commissioner Laddish mentioned the distinction, there's a big ridge right adjacent to that shaded parcel there that was a transfer parcel. Everything on the other side of that is hillside. So there's a big distinction in terms of the value. You're seeing it on the value of that property because it's adjacent to the CCWD plant. I mean, half a mile away from water and sewer. So the general plan encourages development that's adjacent to that type of infrastructure. To Peter's point, the developers, as we all know, pay for that expansion. The county doesn't pay for it. There's no current plan to develop it today. We're looking into some potential ag uses for vineyards and olive trees on it. Unfortunately, though, the ag, because of that soil, we've done extensive soils tests. It doesn't support really any production of anything without a lot of amendment, very expensive amendment. So you just can't make it work for ag and resource production with the punitive nature of the one-to-one mitigation. I think for this particular parcel is unwarranted because of its proximity to current development. We would like, and we'll be happy with the former, or the existing zoning, I should say, the 1996 zoning, that would allow some development. And that development's going to be tempered by access and everything else. So even though it would be 5-acre ranchette development, we would propose something that'd be clustered that would allow the ag to be adjacent to it. And the other uniqueness about this parcel, I might add, is the nearly 2 miles of frontage on Lake Tulloch. That's a very unique component that I don't think any of the other resource production property has. So this is unique. And we're not asking for special treatment, we're asking for something that's existing today. So I would appreciate your consideration of that. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Sure.
You mentioned one-to-one mitigation.
Correct.
I don't think that's a requirement now.
I think that's what's talked about, and
Depending on
yeah.
the situation.
It's really unclear what that mitigation would be, and I think, my partner drafted this letter, but I think the question would be, if you developed a portion of it and you put the rest of it in open space, would that satisfy that requirement? The other thing is as you're aware, the Oak Valley property was put into a conservation easement, and part of the reason that was able to be done was because of the value of that property. When you put stuff into resource production, in essence, you're making it open space, so to sell a conservation easement on it really becomes impossible. So I think you really have to consider those additional elements of that resource production, not to mention the potential for all these people in resource production, that you're putting into resource production, to change their taxes to a Williamson Act. I think could be a huge impact to the county and a loss of tax revenue. So.
They're being taxed at its current use, so.
Well, not all of them.
Future.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
What would the access be from Highway 4?
It would be down through the Tuscany property where there's an easement through the Tuscany property. Tuscany property is also in going through a process that hasn't been submitted yet, but Peter's aware of, to gain access through the CCWD property for primary access, and the secondary access would be Little John Road. So I think you'd have all those issues that would limit the amount of development you could do in there without the, when the Oak Canyon property was changed and the whole loop road situation went away. That's going to avoid any large development in there. It's going to be limited, but I think the 40-acre minimum is too restrictive. Any other questions?
What about a 20-acre minimum?
Probably live with a 10 to 20-acre minimum, because I think what you would want to do, though, is cluster it so you're not dragging out a bunch of infrastructure, but I think that kind of a density would be more realistic.
Is it possible to get an aerial view of that, to swap it to the?
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, usually the aerial stuff's way at the top on when I do it, but I don't see it.
Yeah, it just sort of shows some of the topographic constraints. Doesn't really show the actual aerial. I don't know if the thought if I turned off all the other layers that this area that we should see.
It's nice to see the property boundaries, the parcels.
Well, you have the topo map layer, which will
While
give you...
while you're getting that, does your property bump up against Gopher Ridge or take in part of it?
The Brunker property does.
The Brunker does,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Copper Valley does not.
No, it does not.
Which I don't think that
When all else fails, Google Maps.
Exactly.
No, I was going to see if we had a separate GIS layer that showed the aerial imaging.
If you look at the public web viewer, I
Yeah,
think you'll
yeah.
see it, yeah. Great.
So can you figure out where is the ridge that you were talking about?
It's about where that gold line is, if I'm not mistaken.
The,
We'll wait until he settles again.
Yeah. I can tell you, because we've done the studies on it, this site has about 40% of the property is flat or relatively flat. The rest of it's ridgeline. So you can obviously develop in those flatter areas. And again, clustered.
you might be able to click on that, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
That is great.
So
So this
Peter,
is
that's the Tuscany property.
Tuscany property.
Yeah, that was clear cut by the Brunkers in the 50s. So,
Yeah, it's clean.
But just south of that, where you see a little bit of the oak in there, probably including that large portion of oak.
It's pretty much this area.
Yeah, up a little, right about there and forward. And then it goes up and touches Saddle Creek up there, the big flat section adjacent to Saddle Creek. Right there, yeah, just north of that, right in there, right. So I think in Castle and Cook's proposal, they had a total of 4,200 acres, which they called Copper Valley, which was 1,770 acres that they purchased from Brunker, and the balance, that was Brunker's property that they were planning, I think, 400 units on Brunker's property.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this before we let the commissioners talk a little more?
Tom Infacino, I just have 2 points. First, the EIR for the general plan, which you're prepared to certify today, is based on this being the proposed resource production designation. If you're going to change that designation to some sort of 5-acre minimum, you're going to be increasing the density by 8 to 32 times on 1,700 acres of property. And that would probably push you into some sort of amendment to the EIR, which is going to delay the approval of the general plan. So that's one thing. The second thing is, let's all get a grip here. This map is only the beginning. You all know that. This map will be approved, and as projects come forward, as projects gel, people come forward to amend the plan. This is currently zoned ag. If they needed to develop it in any way, they're going to have to get a rezoning anyway. The general plan amendment is just another tack on to that project. As you heard, there is no plan for development today. When a project is ready, the project can come forward and seek a general plan amendment. As Commissioner Henderson pointed out, and as Peter pointed out, this draft map has been out there for a long time, for at least 4 years before this property was purchased. So the owner was on notice when he went to purchase the property. So those are the only points I wanted to make. One, be careful what you do now. You may end up delaying the process to amend the EIR. Two, there's nothing to stop this project from coming forward when there actually is a project. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wooster, do you have anything you'd like to say on this?
Well, I would say the following. This property is close to the CCWD water and sewage, which is somewhat unique. It does border Lake Tulloch. It's adjacent to Saddle Creek, so it's it's neighboring. And when these maps were done, Oak Canyon was slated for development. That was 3,000 acres. And now that's not going to be developed. So to me, that changes things quite a bit. I don't think I'd be in favor of going back to a 5-acre minimum, but I do think I'd be in favor of going to working lands, which is a 20-acre minimum, which Mr. Hicks has suggested would be more realistic. And, I think it is true that the draft general plan map was out there when they brought the property. But when they bought the but Oak Canyon was there too when we did the map. So those sort of cancel each other a little bit. So I would be in favor of changing the map to working lands. The only real hesitation I have about that is the issue whether that would trigger or require further analysis on the EIR.
Commissioner Fiorina, would you like to add to that?
I think that's a good compromise, the working lands.
Commissioner Henderson?
As I said earlier, this information was out there. Also, Mr. Enfazina brought up a good point. The general plan is basically a breathing document which can be amended by when development is needed. I don't think this will, and further designations, I'm afraid, will you would have to do further study on the EIR. So I believe that for now we leave it as proposed.
I do think that we have to keep in mind that even the map that we have here would allow much more development than what is needed, and if we have to at this point take a sizable chunk and make even more development possible under the land use map, I think does raise or could raise a question on the EIR. And I think basically it's that when the market, first, I wouldn't want to have this property rezoned to permit development on 5-acre parcels, residential, because that's just the sort of development that we're not trying to get under this plan. we want innovative development so that what ends up on this property, if the market allows it, is an innovative design, as was pointed out, cluster units of some sort, what other infrastructure development or commercial development might be desirable, depending on the time that the market indicates that this is an opportune place for further development. My understanding is that there's enough potential development in the Copper area now to accommodate all of the increased population that is expected for all of Calaveras County. I think it's premature to consider now what development might be appropriate for this land, and I think keeping it under the resource production category for now makes a lot of sense, with the idea that when the market develops, let's see what's appropriate for this.
Okay, so actually, Commissioner Wooster pretty much went through my thought process. Like, I could see making this working lands. However, I don't know that that's really helping future development there, which, as Commissioner Laddish mentioned, would most likely be something much different than just any simple designation we put it on here. So it would probably have a specific plan, and it would be setting aside property, and it would be clustering development and trying to take advantage of the frontage on the lake there. So I'm not sure that changing it to working lands, which does feel appropriate to me, because just looking at the aerial, you can see that the land's not going to be resource production in any of the traditional manner, not efficiently. So given that, I have said 1,000 times to people that we already have enough existing lots in our county to handle all the reasonably anticipatable development or new people coming here without creating any new parcels. I think that while I would contemplate a working lands change, I'm probably most in favor of just leaving it alone and not creating any potential issue with the EIR at this point. So.
The only thing I would say to that is, in the Copperopolis area, this is probably, next to Sawmill, the most appropriate land to be looking for a future development of some kind. And since the working lands seems to be workable, if you will, for the developer, as opposed to resource production, it would be one less hurdle they have to go through.
Except I think they'd probably be back in trying to do some sort of, they wouldn't just be simply breaking it into 40-acre parcels or 20-acre parcels. We think that the most appropriate development there would be something that probably would require a specific plan in order, right?
That may be, but what they run into with the resource production is now a somewhat
mitigations
mitigation requirements that are flexible, if you will, but they would still have to be complied with. And I'm not convinced that they would have the same level of difficulty with the working lands designation.
Well, they wouldn't, because we took that out of our mitigations.
Right. And so those are the reasons I continue to think the working land designation would be best.
Are you suggesting that that be applied to all of the parcels that we see there, or just the parcels that are immediately adjacent to the hatched areas?
The entire 1,770 acres of
So that's
Copper Valley
everything.
Partners, not the Brunker property.
Could we back out just a little bit? And
I'm not sure why the.
our parcels go away.
Yeah, well, but it's this area
Yeah.
here, these parcels.
Is that line? That line?
Is
This
that
one right
the
here?
line right there?
This one here?
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, why was I thinking it was included this property here too?
That's the wrong.
Oh, okay, so it's this area here,
Okay.
include this piece.
Yeah, what is that? What is that island in there?
That's cut out, that's the former mine. And that was cut out, because of the purpose.
So would you like to make a proposal, Commissioner Wooster?
Well, I would propose that we do change the land use designation map on the Copper Valley Partners LLC 1,770 acre parcel to, from single-family residence to working lands.
Well, I think what we're doing is amending the proposed land use map. So it'd be
Right.
changing it from resource production to.
To working lands.
Right.
I would agree with that.
And working lands would be consistent with their existing zoning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where's the bunker property on there?
It's everything to the south. And
So,
west.
I mean, along with that, we did get a comment letter from Mr. Robert Bruckner. I do have a problem. I don't feel comfortable if we're just, for Copper Valley, they get working lands, but we're going to keep it as resource production for Mr. Wilkner as well. I mean, it's kind of, to me, it looks like favoritism, and I don't feel comfortable with that. I understand what the developer's trying to do. I'm not anti-development. I want to see, but the purpose of this general plan is to make growth where it fits in with the general plan and our vision of the future. I don't feel comfortable making it working lands. I think it will jeopardize our EIR and what we're trying to prove. However, everything is market driven, as pointed out earlier. I just don't see a wave of people driving up here to buy houses and property. So I think that personally, I'm going to vote for resource production on this.
I agree with Commissioner Henderson for the reasons stated.
I am very torn on this. Peter, do you feel that the working lands change would jeopardize the conclusions of the EIR in any way?
I think I need to go back and look at it more closely. We'd have to look at the analysis and how that might affect, the point that Commissioner Wooster brought out is that we have changed, we reduced density in the region.
Right.
It could balance it, but I'd want to look more closely at that before
How-
I sort of made a categorical statement, yes or no. I don't really know at this point.
Well, Oak Canyon had how many parcels originally?
I think it was in the range of 3,000 units plus commercial
Right.
and lodging development.
So our 1,700 divided by 20, the worst case, right? is not going to be that many parcels. And I'm just from a simple mathematical calculation. I think I'm going to have to say that I believe that we should stick with what we've been showing for the last few years, that resource production, and when the market is such that it would make sense to develop that, I certainly think any planning commission is going to be open to a proposal to change it to something else that fits what's really intended for that. I think the working lands might make us feel better, like we're making some accommodations, but we're really not doing any good planning. So I'm going to have to agree with Commissioners Henderson and Laddish.
Okay. Any other issues?